What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Goats of Growth. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this episode. We recruit today's go-to-market teams that will lead the next generation of unicorns. Email me, web, at thejdavidgroup.com to learn more about how we can help. And don't forget, I'm also working on a book called The Goats of Growth, the untold stories of the greatest revenue leaders of all time, due out by the end of 2023. So follow me on LinkedIn to learn more about that. Now, my guest today is Sarah Milby, who is the CEO and founder of Valor Performance, which is a leadership and performance mindset coaching platform that helps empower executives, managers, and teams with data-driven high-performance coaching. Sarah, welcome to the Goats of Growth.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let me just start with what I just ended with. Give us a sense of what Valor Performance does and the value proposition that you bring to your customer.
Sure. So as you said, data-driven coaching, and we do it at scale. So we're working with teams and organizations across the world to help their leaders get connected to a high-performance coach, access to proven evidence-based digital exercises, a lightweight 360 and content that's always updating and refreshing. So they have the tools to help them lead themselves, lead their teams, especially during times of change and during high pressure situations. So that's kind of our sweet spot. When there's high pressure, high competitive environments, that's where Valor can really help out.
I want to get into your backstory a little bit, but before I do that, one of the things that has been on my mind literally over the last maybe 12 hours, 24 hours has been, obviously we're recording this on March 15th, where just after Silicon Valley Bank failed, and there's a lot of, existential, I'll say, conversations that are happening right now with certain leaders and certain companies. And I guess I wonder, what have you been seeing as far as the reaction, or what people are talking about and caring about most that Valor is helping people with, whether it's crisis management or communicating bad news in a way where maybe they weren't necessarily or previously equipped. Just give me a sense of what's been happening. Maybe not just even within the last 24 hours, but certainly just as the markets have turned.
Yeah, Jay, you mentioned crisis management, and someone recently asked me about that. And my response is, not only if you just look at the last week of chaos and navigating some complex decision making, but if you just zoom out to the past few years, leaders today are just, it's right and left. We're fielding so much pressure and change that we have to adapt to. And this actually gets to a lot of why I originally started Valor, but now is really becoming even more important, is the concepts around adaptive leadership and being able to navigate stress and change, and how do you have your mindset in the right place so it actually can help propel you forward and not hold you back. But because look, why I started the business is we often, in the modern workforce in general, but definitely within sales, which that's the world that I came from, and actually where I originally started the business was focused solely on revenue generating teams. We often have focused so much on methodology and process training, which is important. And there's a gap if you don't also pay attention to the attitude, motivation, mindset, EQ, and more of that heart of the seller behind the sale. We know that that is going to be critical to help individuals and teams succeed. And so now we're just seeing that play out again and again. We're like, those processes. So if you take like the soccer analogy, which is the sport I came from, the dribbling and shooting, well, then you had COVID happen. And those dribbling and shooting techniques kind of went out the window for a lot of sales organizations. But the underlying foundational skills around attitude, creativity, ability to still connect with people in maybe a different medium than people had before, like those are the things that help teams become successful and adapt, through the change. So we're just seeing that right and left, Jay, is like the need to adapt real time, keeping your composure. And I'd say one of the last things you said that I do want to hit on is like what people are looking for. With so much uncertainty, people look for leaders who do give them groundedness
Mm.
and pillars around like the values of the organization, the principles, how transparency on how they're making decisions and that communication. So we're seeing that over and over again in the Silicon Valley Bank situation, which I was fielding myself as a executive who used SVB as a bank. We're seeing it play out real time.
Wow, so many questions even within that. But let me just go back to the origin a little bit. And you mentioned that you were in sales previously, and that's sort of where where your company was born from. But I guess the question is that you went to market with this thought in mind, that it wasn't necessarily going to be methodology based, it was going to be attitude and some of the other power skills that you need in order to navigate through all this stuff. Did the problem manifest itself in a way for you at one particular moment in time when you said, okay, there needs to be a company or a solution out there in the marketplace that solved this? And if so, what was it? What was the thing that sort of kicked it off and said, Sarah, you got to do this. Let's go do it.
Oh, yeah. So I had this crazy idea, right, around this gap in how we were setting up our teams, but not crazy because I felt it myself. And as a leader, as I was growing out my teams, I kept feeling like I needed to see, coach my team on seeing the opportunities in the challenge and, keeping their heads in the game, helping them get in the zone and minimize the distraction so they could stay focused. Like so many of these concepts that I learned through my history is that as an athlete, I got connected to a performance coach and he helped me with these things as it relates to sport. But turns out these are skills for life and definitely within the sales arena. So I started leveraging these mental skills, performance mindset skills with my team. So I knew it myself, but I wanted to take it to other revenue leaders. So at the time I moved from the Bay Area to Boston and was just meeting some new people and asking a ton of questions and being just wanting feedback. Like, do you think this is crazy? How do you solve this gap currently? Because it's not uncommon for us in sales to say things like, once you make a deal, go make 10 phone calls because you're in the zone, or like, attitude is contagious. So, the energy that you bring to your prospects is critical. Like we know these things, but we don't train for them. So I was like, how do you do that? So I was just asking a lot of questions. And I was meeting with a revenue leader downtown Boston, Cafe Nero on Summer Street, if you really want to know. And I was
worked there.
No, oh, that's just good karma. Good karma there.
On
there
Summer
we go.
Street, yeah, that's right.
This is amazing. Oh my God, what if you were in the timeline doesn't work out, but that would be just too funny. And so I had visuals because I'm a visual learner. So I was like, look, like here's some like how it would potentially work and just asking questions again.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, if you build that, I would absolutely roll it out to my team. Why don't you send me like an LOI or just a partnership agreement? I'd like to kick this off in October. This was like the summer, because that's around when I'm going to be doing a big kickoff with my team. Just send me the invoice, blah, blah. So I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have a partnership agreement. I had no legal counsel. I don't even know if I was incorporated at the time, actually. And so, it was just this idea. And that validation to me was it's go time. So it really was that moment, which then catalyzed for me, again, this concept, but now I had a paying customer, someone willing to pay for this idea if I built it. And that was enough of the proof point for me to then go and get 2 more proof points. So what I end up doing, and I know that you like to get really granular with your audience, so I'll just kind of tell you the specifics here, is I then saw it as I had an alpha customer. We're doing an alpha launch in October. We have 2 more spots for alpha customer launches to be the first to access and I don't even know if I had Valor at the time as a name, but I've always been obsessed with courage. So it wasn't too long before we got to Valor, which means heroic courage.
Mhm.
Anyway, and so then I used that as momentum to then find 2 more, and then I had 3 paying customers that were going to be launching in October. I could then go to the venture community and I could say, look, here's what we're doing, and I could raise some money. So it all kind of built on itself. But Cafe Nero, that's where it all started.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. Let me ask you, when you said if he said if you build that, my question is that build what? In other words, what were you showing him on paper? What did it look like? Because right now in my mind it's like esoteric. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it's this thought, this idea. What was it that you were building for him that you said that you would build specifically?
Yes. Oh, I love the detailed question. So there was the what, which is what you and I are talking about, performance mindset and these mental skills, but then the how. So what I had done, and a step before that was, again, I'm a visual person.
Yeah.
So to me, honestly, for myself, but also to bring it to life more, I found a designer. And based in Boston, we did some whiteboarding sessions, and we just started kind of like not spaghetti at the wall, but it was mock-ups. I mean, we were saying like, well, what if? And so we thought about some core components and what would be the most valuable components. Because at first my vision was like huge. So I was like, and it's gonna do this and that and this. And he was so great to say like, yeah, Sarah, over the next decade, it'll do all those things. Where are we gonna start?
Right.
And so part of my conversation with these revenue leaders was also helping to refine, where are we going to start? What's going to be the most value? Now, what's interesting about Valor is we sell to organizations and teams, and then the individual, the employee, the high performer, the high potential, the leader receives Valor. So there's numerous stakeholders, right? So I had to get feedback at kind of these different levels. There was at the individual who's receiving the coaching. So let's say the sales rep or the sales manager, the sales executive, and then also whoever was actually paying for it at the organization. And so anyway, just to specifically answer your question, I had a couple of these mock-ups. Now, anybody who knows software and tech would probably look at these vaporware slides and go, that just doesn't work technically. But it was like, oh, you have like a video session, with a coach, and then you do these like little digital learnings over here. It was enough to give a sense of the software, and then the data analytics that the leader would get, which helps them be a better leader because they get a pulse on their team while protecting confidentiality of the coaching, but giving them insights on topics and themes and things that they could reinforce at the team level, which is really powerful.
How many, again, I'm putting my sales cap on, I guess, for a moment. How many conversations did you have before that first validating conversation that you had with the gentleman at Cafe Nero?
Oh, good question. Let me think back. Well, I should probably say, I don't know if this is a confession, but it's just the reality. I wasn't all in on this concept of Valor until that time. So I had like it took my own courage to even veer and say, I want to start something.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could go back to that time, but the point is, I had probably 3 what I'll call business concepts that I was like kicking the tires around, like interested in and learning about. And this one was one. And so probably prior to that, gosh, I mean, at least a dozen, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, the good, the bad, the ugly. I think sometimes when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure this may resonate with you, you sometimes have to hold the feedback at a distance, or at least I have to, because I care so much about my work. And so there's this really fun book. It's called The Mom Test, which is when you're first in product development. And the whole point is like, you don't only want to get feedback from your mom. So like if you say like, Mom, is this good? Like she's going to kind of feel like she needs to say yes. And so similar, like when you're taking things to market, you don't want to ask questions like, is this good? Like that kind of this where maybe it's your insecurity. Like, what if they give you criticism? Because at that time, you just totally have to take in that growth mindset. Any feedback is going to be like informative. And then why I say hold it at a distance is because sometimes you just have to have the self-trust to know that if someone, like in my case, kind of scoffed at the concept, have the self-trust that they just don't see what you see. And that's okay.
And that happened, presumably.
Oh yeah. Like I said, a dozen before this like moment of like go time. And it's kind of this interesting balance, Jay, because, was I just, it was go time for me, but what if I wasn't receptive to that go time? What if, and so you, it's not always crystal clear. Is that go time, or was he just kind of like telling me what I wanted to hear? Or, and there were so many who said the opposite, told me why it wouldn't work. And how dare I just continue on and keep asking others and keep refining, well, who is the ideal customer profile for this? And okay, so that's an interesting data point. Is there validity to that? Yes. Okay, let me incorporate that feedback. Is there validity to that? No, let me throw that out because I actually think that what I'm onto here is going to be really powerful. So, it for me was a ton of self-discovery in the entrepreneur journey. And frankly, took a ton of my own courage and valor, like I said, to even have the audacity to say, well, why not me?
Yeah.
Why not get something started? And have the persistence and perseverance to just keep going until I had that go moment. And when I did have that Cafe Nero moment, again, I leaned into it. And I then said, okay, now I'm going to go set up get incorporated, find a legal counsel, get a bank account. And it was enough of the activation energy for me just to go. And then I just built on it from there.
I was going to ask an entirely different question, but then you just mentioned activation energy. That sounds like something that you.
Sorry, I'm so nerdy. Yeah, I know, it's so nerdy. I know, it's like such a, so activation energy is like this hurdle. It's a scientific concept of like, you have to go through this hurdle of energy. So like sometimes when like molecules are, I'm just such a nerd. When they're coming together, like atoms creating molecules, sometimes they have to like have activation energy to like force them to come together. And then it's like goes forward. Or sometimes in chemical reactions, you have to like get over a certain amount of activation energy for the reaction to occur. Sorry, pre-med nerd. And so sometimes I think about that is like, how do you just, sometimes it's that first hurdle, that first hump you have to get over. And then it doesn't take as much energy once you get going. Frankly, I have a lot of required activation energy sometimes, as much as I love running, just to like get out the door. I have activation energy sometimes in conversations that I don't really want to have, but I know I need to have. And so it's like, once you get started though, or even sometimes public speaking, where it's like, I know for myself, I need to have those first few sentences nailed, because then I can kind of get rolling. So anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that term, activation energy. I have a feeling I'm going to be using that one a lot for sure. So it might be deep, but I'm thinking.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there you go.
So what I was going to ask is the time between that conversation at Cafe Nero and October. Were you able to build something there, or like had you, because you hadn't raised money yet? So, or were you using your own money? What did the end product look like by the time October even?
Oh yeah, great question. So lots had to happen. So I had been, again, I was kind of like kicking the tires on a couple different business concepts. I was looking for, at the time, I had this preconceived notion that startups required a like sales business oriented co-founder and a technical co-founder. Coming from Silicon Valley, I was just like, yep, that's what I need. So I need to find my technical co-founder. So I had been, and again, I had this designer who could build some of the mock-ups of the software. And so I'd been looking for engineers and engineering talent. But then that moment in Cafe Nero happened that I wanted to lean into. And so I found a great development shop,
Mm.
and based in Boston actually, who could help me with the MVP. And in parallel, I was looking for full-time engineers. And so by the time, let me just zoom ahead to October for a second. By the time we had gotten to the launch, it was a really nice handoff between my first full-time engineer hire and the development shop to then take it. So it's like it would then be all Valor run. But they helped like really jumpstart that. And I did self-fund it. So I pulled for my savings and just took a bet, on myself that this was going to play out. And again, in parallel, I was going to raise capital. I was looking to fill those other two like alpha launches, which I did through like network. And then I was hiring the first 5 Valor performance coaches.
Mm.
And that's how we started. That was the MVP. That was the initial alpha launch. And I was going to play it to the next chapter, but I'll end there. That's how it got started.
Yeah. So, okay, that's very interesting for sure. What about your own sort of mindset? And you mentioned activation energy, but your own mindset going through that, because you described that very well, but I would imagine that it was stressful, it was challenging. Did you still have your own like a performance coach yourself, or was it just sort of using what you're teaching, I guess, if you will? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Because I've always been a student of this work, and I don't think you're ever done learning.
Yeah.
It's practicing a lot of these concepts around mindset. So let's use the one that I said earlier about seeing the opportunity in challenge. And
Hmm.
that concept, which is a concept around like learned optimism, which is science-based. It comes from the work of Dr. Martin Seligman at UPenn, and it's a lot of like positive psychology. And it gets a bad rep because it's like, oh, you have to think about puppies and rainbows all the time. That's not it. It's about how do you acknowledge that the challenge is there, but how do you see the opportunity? How do you still keep your feet moving within that challenge so you're not debilitated by it? And so for me, that has always been a thread. I'd say a thread for me as it relates to mindset work and my own development has always been controlling the controllables. I still struggle with this today. It's still where I have a ton of opportunity to grow. And I'd say that self-trust component, like knowing that I'm not going to know what to do or how to do, but have the courage to reach out and ask for help, ask for advisors, ask for people who have done it before. And that to me really helped get through that time. And here's the thing, it gets me through this time. Like it gets me through each chapter of the company building that I've been on. And for sure I use it today. I often start some customer kickoffs when I used to join those to say, I started the business for myself, and I underappreciated how much I would need it to run the business.
Right. For sure.
Right. And so like and it's funny, you mentioned the Silicon Valley Bank situation. I said to the team that, I felt so grateful that I have Valor principles like that. Again, it's not like I'm check the box done, like that I have exposure to them. They're so top of mind for me just
Mhm.
to help get through those challenging times. But so anyway, in those moments, I was definitely leaning on a lot of it and just one foot in front of the other. I mean, that's a lot of, frankly, performance psychology, which is a huge framework that we leverage at Valor, which is like some applied performance and sports psychology. And some of it is there's the outcome. So it's like, oh, I want to like launch a successful company. But there's the process steps. And I was so focused on the process. And the beautiful thing about that October launch is it gave me a marker. It gave me a milestone. And then it was like, well, yeah, there's a ton I need to do after October, but let me focus on what I have to do before then to make sure October's a success, knowing that that will be a building block to get to the next one.
I want to get to where you were then to where you are now in that journey, if you will. But just one other question I have is, when you got to the point where you had that one particular customer, maybe those three by October, right? When your MVP was built, how quickly, or how should I put this? How did you validate it? How quickly did the feedback come to you to say, this is like, we're happy with this, like this is working? You know what I mean? Like, what was the feedback loop, and what did it need to look like for them, I guess, or for you to be like, okay, we've got something, let's go?
Yeah, no, it's great. So in those early customers, again, they bought in. They were evangelists. So like what we think of as our evangelist buyers, right? So in company building, Jeffrey Moore, I think, had this concept around crossing the chasm, where you start with your evangelist buyer and then you get to your more skeptical buyers when you need more proof points, case studies, data points. In those early days, I was with those evangelists. So a lot of them were looking at the time in the market, it was really around retaining, developing top talent. And so for them, they were really looking at the engagement and then the feedback, like NPS and the feedback from the individuals receiving the coaching. Because again, we sell to organizations, they give it to individuals. And for us, the beautiful thing with the Valor experience is that often happens once people connect with a coach. Our coaches are phenomenal, world-class, high caliber performance coaches distributed across the world now. And so for us then in the product development, we know that we have to get people to connect with their coach as soon as possible. And the great news is that the way that we position Valor, set it up front, and the way that the product works is that happens within a week of people getting access to Valor. People get on, they connect with a coach, and that's the magic moment, the emotional magic moment. And that's usually what starts this like organic trickling of feedback and positive data points on engagement rates and what people are getting out of it. And so that was really where I started. And then now, we've had to build upon that as we've navigated across the chasm, but also gotten into some other markets outside of revenue generating teams. So it's morphed since then, but that was absolutely where we started.
And at what point was it time? You mentioned that you had added, I think you said you had hired, what, 5 salespeople, I think, to begin with, right?
Oh,
Like
performance coaches. Yeah, the coaches. Yeah.
Performance coaches. At what point did you say, okay, let's go, right? In other words, let's get, we've got 3, let's get, 300, I guess, or whatever, or 30 and so forth. Like at what point, and how were you, what needed to happen, I guess, from an operational perspective to actually now go from, obviously just a few people and a performance coach, that's one thing, but to actually start building the business and the infrastructure, what did you need to do to sort of get it scaling and growing?
I think it happens, it's not overnight. I mean, in startup world, entrepreneur world, especially where you're juggling so many things, you're being thoughtful about, we've always been very capital efficient. And so it's always like, oh, I needed that person yesterday, like sometimes you do have to be popping at the seams on certain things. And I'll say this, a lot of the folks who joined and now even still join Valor are very passionate and tied to our mission and the impact that we have. And so therefore people take on a ton, they carry a lot of water. And so you start to like the popping at the seams, like that's a high bar. So you have to really be proactive and reactive to thinking about your hiring and resource planning, but also scenario planning, because you don't want, or at least I've never been the type of leader to overhire, as we have seen recently in tech, the downsides of that. But also you need to make sure that you're fueling the parts of the business that need to be fueled to get you to the next level. And so it's constantly iterative. I'd say that one of the things that I try to leverage, to the extent this is helpful, is scenario planning. So I talk about this a lot with the team. I actively work on this with our CFO and with a broader leadership team to make sure that we're thinking about if this, then that. So, okay, here's our best case scenario. Here's our base case scenario. Here's our worst case scenario. And then at what point do we need to make these decisions based on these milestones to know whether to pull the trigger or not?
Interesting. And who specifically, like in terms of functions, are those people? Is this an operations person? Is it a CFO? Is it like, what is it?
In the hiring plan? Well, it'll be
in the if then scenarios that you're having conversations with internally, like who are the people functionally that are helping you
sure.
make
Sure. Well, at Valor, we have a head of engineering, we have a head of product. And so if we're looking at, let's say, the roadmap, and we're talking about the if then this, that, then that, like, what are we working on? What's in the roadmap over the next quarter? What's going to be driving some of the business objectives forward? And then given our velocity, when we expect all of this, certain things to be deployed, as it relates to sales, marketing, similar types of thinking as far as our projection planning, but then always being thoughtful about, like, okay, that's our, let's say, best case. What about base case and worst case based on what we've seen historically, what we project? And then same with our current customer success team and our current customers. We, for instance, have some very large organizations that have partnered with Valor, and we're only working with a small percent of the leaders there. And so just to give you a specific one of the if this, then that, one, like our base case may be that we renew that customer, same size, it's an ARR. So the ongoing revenue that we get from that customer. And then the worst case is if we churned that customer. And then the best case is we expand that customer. And then we can put together our assumptions based on what we've done in the past, as far as we have a really strong land and expand motion. So we can look at those past percentages and contract value increase. But we can also be thoughtful about the size of that customer. So based on their overall employee count and where we know that we have strong alignment and value prop, what do we believe would be a reasonable projection to get to for a best case scenario?
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful for sure. Let me just come to the Silicon Valley Bank thing for a moment here, because it's relevant as we're doing this interview. And I'm just curious, again, just because of all the work that you do to support companies as well. I guess you're a Silicon, you were a customer of Silicon Valley Bank, a depositor, I guess, if you will. Just tell me, how did you hear the news? Number one, like where did you first, I guess, hear the news? Was it directly from them, somebody there? What did that communication look like? And then how did you move forward, I guess? In other words, how did you go about communicating it to the team? Because I think it's important for us to hear how someone like Sarah Milby, who coaches people on this, handles that stuff,
Sure. I mean, I have to admit, like, far from like the role model on how to navigate all these things, but I'll tell you how I thought about it and then how I chose to respond. So first heard the news from one of my investors, and that was Thursday morning. And so, yeah, I'll literally give you the play-by-play. Thursday morning, then had to get up to speed on it alongside our CFO, and try to understand what was happening, and what near-term decisions we may need to be thinking about. By Thursday night, Friday morning, when we had discussed a couple of just what was happening, do we need to pull our money? What are the options? Everything was frozen at that time, so we couldn't do anything. And so we knew that like more information was coming. That was what everybody kept saying. And so my and our and our investors too first thought was the team. So our payroll was being sent. I'm going to get super detailed for you all. Our payroll is being sent to our employees on Friday. It was payroll day. And so the first thought was just confirming and making sure that that went through. And early Friday, it looked like all was fine. Later Friday, we get a notice from our third-party payroll provider that signaled it had not gone through. And so for this, I was like, you can't just like, hope is not a strategy, right? And that's not a way to lead the team. It's not the type of culture we have at Valor. And so I felt like I needed to inform the team the uncertainty, and commit my or communicate my commitment to figuring it out. So that was essentially what I said, was letting them know, like, if in case they hadn't seen the news about Silicon Valley Bank, which was our bank, and letting them know that we got a notification that perhaps payroll was just pending. And so we were working hard to figure it out as soon as possible. And I would be back in touch Monday morning when I had an update, and thanking everybody for their patience. And again, my commitment. I take that so personally, and it's such a responsibility that I don't hold lightly. The fact that these are people's lives that that need to run, irrespective of what happens with the company. By Saturday, so this is all real time, that was Friday night. By Saturday, we started getting notes. I started getting notes back from the team saying like it did hit their bank account. They were confirming that all went well. At which point I had already had calls with my investors to figure out options should it had not gone through, to make sure that the team is all made whole. And at that time, Jay, like nobody knew if for every dollar we had in SVB, we'd be getting 50 cents back. Like, I mean, all sorts of numbers are being thrown around. And to get smarter on the situation, luckily I got connected to a founders group of other entrepreneurs who were impacted. So there was a lot of sharing. I had like business school classmates sharing learnings. And so I was trying to just get up to speed on all this real time. And then, which goes back to actually what we were talking about, is like, you don't need to know. I don't need to be an expert in the banking or financial industry, but I know I need to know, people who have a sense and can help me think through what my options are to take care of what I need to take care of. Anyway, after my team confirmed that 100% had received their paychecks, that was a huge sigh of relief for me. And that was by Saturday night, that I had majority confirming that. And so then by Sunday was still thinking through the options forward in the paths. And then the federal government obviously stepped in to say that, you will be made whole. It will be a dollar for dollar. Again, sigh of relief. But it's navigating that uncertainty. So for me, I guess just to go back, long-winded, but to go back to just how I thought about it was, I think during times of uncertainty, I think you need to be super thoughtful and over communicate with your team, not in a way, in a way that's reasonable, in a way that gives people some solidity and knows that you're taking care of things, you're being transparent. I think it fosters trust to get ahead of it. So people aren't just wondering, wait, wasn't that our bank? Huh.
Right.
Should we be worried about this? Like, you don't want that. You want to get ahead of it. And then also like, what's the past? So being very clear on when you'll be back in touch. Like, okay, here's what I'm going to do in between. And then I'll circle back during this time. Like just being very clear during times of uncertainty matters. And then also I think people value not just email. I mean, I know this sounds like really technical as far as my advice giving, but I do think showing your face as a leader matters. So this, to me, by Monday morning, when I had more clarity and I had committed that I'd be back in touch, I was like, oh gosh, should I just reply all and send another email? No, I did a video. We had a team meeting to address it. Like, I think as a leader, holding that space for people is really important too.
Wow, thank you for going through all that, because as you know, I do like detail, and yeah, I think it's important for a lot of people to hear. I mean, some of the things I just wrote down were clarity, communication, over communication. I'm hearing even collaboration when you talked about getting together with the other founders, your other business school colleagues, and those types of things. The last thing I heard there was transparency, and also setting expectations, right? Like letting them know what to expect next. And then frankly, lastly, like you said, right, putting adding a little bit of humanity to it, right? And actually standing in front of the team, if you will, standing in front of the team and
That's right.
in communicating in a very way to give them some solidarity, which I appreciate. Okay. If you're listening, everyone, I apologize. We're cutting this one a little bit short because I have a personal commitment that I realized after we scheduled this that I have to get to. But I want to end it with just asking you, Sarah, how folks can thank you, to reach out to you. Either maybe they have some questions that I didn't ask, frankly. Maybe they want to learn more about Valor Performance. Maybe they'll learn more about your story, or frankly, even what we just talked about as far as going through the Silicon Valley bank situation. So what's the best way for people to learn more about you and Valor?
Thank you. Check out valorperform.com for sure to learn more about Valor. And I'm on LinkedIn. So Sarah Milby, Valor Performance, you can find me. And I'd love you to reach out, anybody listening. And thank you, Jay, so much for having me.
Absolutely. And if you do reach out to Sarah, don't forget to put in the subject line or whatever that you heard her on the Goats of Growth, so she'll pay attention to yours and move to the top of her LinkedIn inbox, so to speak. So Sarah Milby, thank you for joining the Goats of Growth.
Thanks, Jay.
Goodbye, everybody. Cue in the music, and I promise rapid fire 5 questions next time. Cue in the music.
Oh, right.